And it looks like we are live on YouTube. Just double checking. Yep. All right, I'm going to close out that browser. That'll be immensely annoying. All right, we'll start in about 30 seconds. All right. All right. Oh, chat. Hey, everyone. Just before I start recording here, if you're with us on Zoom, then absolutely, if you want us to answer your questions, use your hand, raise your hand, and let us know what it is you want to do. I think there's a button down here. We haven't done a Zoom call in a while, so it'll take me a minute to get used to all the aspects of it. But if you're watching on YouTube, we're not really monitoring the YouTube channel, but if a member is and they see a good question, they're more than happy to drop that question into the chat, or if one of our contributors happens to be monitoring YouTube. And so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can remember how to start recording. All right. All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to another edition of Mixing Light's Office Hours Live, where we answer our members' questions about just about anything related to post-production as it relates mostly to finishing, color grading. We are going to be dealing with some on-set stuff. And then our members are in our Zoom studio audience here, and they are welcome to join us and participate. So as we're talking about discussions, if you have something you want to say, raise your hand. We'll call on you. When we're wrapped up with the kind of pre-packaged questions, we'll open it up to a live audience. We are going to keep this down to 60 minutes. So at 40 minutes past the next hour, we will be wrapping this up. And let's begin. So we've got with us Peter Morgenthaler. Say hi, everybody. Peter. And then we've got Kaylee Bateman. Say hi, Kaylee.
Hello.
And Zeb Chadfield.
Hi.
I want to thank all of them for agreeing to come on today and to help us all work through these various problems. And we haven't done office hours in a couple months now, and that's all on me. So just some quick behind the scenes. These things twice a month was getting kind of hard to keep track. And after months of doing these twice a month, it was becoming extreme. And then my professional work got in the middle of it. And so finally, a couple of weeks ago, I'm like, I got to pull Band-Aid. I just got to make one happen. And so I decided on Monday, we're going Thursday, hell or high water. And here we are on Thursday, we're going. The intention is to go twice a week. I've got a new assistant. So she's going to be helping me manage bringing contributors on and all the kind of behind the scenes stuff that has to happen that pulls these office hours off. And I'm going to start with a bit of a tradition, which is we're going to go around the horn to the contributors who have joined us today. And I'm going to ask them a question. And I'm going to give them a couple of minutes each to talk, and then I'll answer my own question because that's only fair. And so I'm going to start with, I'm trying to decide if I go with the new gal or if I go with one of the old hands. I'm going to go with the new gal. That's the way to do it. And so Callie, how you doing? And the question of the day is, and when you start, because it's your first office hours, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us the 1 minute, who you are, your background, why you're on Mixing Light, that type of thing. And then the question is, has there been something interesting or new that you've learned or done in the past couple of months or weeks that you'd like to share with us? Something that tells us a little bit about you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Well, I'm super excited to be here, and it's awesome to be part of Mixing Light. I'm a colorist who's based in Australia, and I've been working in color for a bit over a decade now. And I've kind of recently moved into being able to do a few of the bigger films around, which has been really exciting. Last year, I was a co-colorist on Elvis, which was great. And I've worked as a VFX colorist as well for DNEG on some pretty huge films. So I was part of the team that won the Oscar for visual effects for June, which was pretty cool. I wasn't a huge part, but it was a great experience to be part of it. So as a VFX colorist there for about a year and a half, and then for 6 months last year. So I got to work on some pretty cool shows. And I'm with Mixing Light because I just believe massively strongly about teaching and training, and think it's a great way to bring some of the big post facility experience to people who might be working disparately in freelance capacities and coming up through the ranks. So it's lovely to be here. So that's the 1 minuter. And in terms of stuff that I've learned recently, so I was like low-key panicking when Patrick told me that we'd have this question before, because I was like, what have I learned? I've learned nothing. But that's not true, because I saw Core's face appear, and he actually taught me something really cool just like 2 weeks ago. So I've been looking at how to utilize DCTLs more in my workflow. And we were talking about doing camera lots that utilize DCTLs in their creation, so that we can then create DCTLs that replicate those camera LUTs, but have a little bit of, flexibility and adaptability in how you utilize those parameters of the LUT. You're not just kind of like boxed into the LUT. So it was actually Core who put me onto a video that he made showing me how to create a LUT in Fusion, which I'd never done before. I'd always just done it in the color tab. And he's got this like sorcery where you put in the resolution of the LUT as your project settings, and then you're able to create a LUT out of Fusion of that resolution. So I'd highly recommend having a look at that video, because it was super cool, and it created like a real one-to-one result based off the DCTLs that I'd used. So thanks, Core.
Hey, Core, if you want to drop the link to that video into the comments, because the other place I'll drop it is in, I send out a weekly newsletter on color grading, and I love to drop it into there as well for that audience. It goes out to about 5,000 people who are interested in what it is we do. So, Core, be sure to drop us that link. All right, next we're going to go to Zeb. Zeb, something new, interesting, whatever you want to share with us. You're up.
Yeah, I'm gonna break tradition and not talk about something techie, because I spend all my time talking about something techie. But I feel like a lot of my business and the things I've talked about Mixing Light in the past have been about mental health and trying to make a healthier post-production industry, which is a bit of an uphill battle. But I feel like the biggest brain hack that I've had, and I'm just going to sound like a big hippie saying it, but basically there's this constant battle, I think, that most of us have with the hedonic treadmill, where we're always kind of going sort of, if I just do this and just get that, then I will suddenly be happy. And the problem is that our happiness level is sort of set. Our base level happiness is kind of where it is. So no matter what happens to you, you'll go up, you'll go down, you'll come back to your base level. And for a long time, many, many years, that's been a source of frustration. But when I kind of realized this, I read about this kind of base level happiness thing, I then got obsessed with, I guess going back to the tech side of things, trying to hack it. If you've got a base level happiness, I must be able to hack that and raise it like a couple of percent so that my base level's just a little bit better than it is naturally. And everything I researched kept bringing me back to gratitude and being grateful for what you have. And then I started doing this with my kids around the breakfast table, where I base it, because it can be hard. Like, we've got lots of things to feel grateful for, but we're never conscious of it. We don't really think about it very much. But then through the framing of what do I take for granted that my grandparents or great grandparents would think is amazing, makes it really easy to find something to be grateful for. So every day I sort of do that with my kids, and we talk about being grateful for having a toilet in the house, so we don't have to go out to the toilet in the garden, and we have central heating, and we have, fresh fruit and vegetables and all of these sorts of things. And I've been doing it about 3 months now, and my happiness is definitely hacked, and it's really creepy. I was saying to my wife yesterday, I kind of walk around and I'm smiling sometimes now, and my cheeks feel sore, and I don't know why that's happening. But I feel like, yeah, I just want to share that. I've been telling everyone I can, because it's been very surprising, actually, because I'm a bit of a skeptic about most of these things.
That's brilliant. Now, I heard a podcast recently, it might have been even on the Art of Manliness or something like that, which, yes, is a podcast I listen to, and got me using the straight razor. And and I think they had an interview with, there's an author who just wrote a book about happiness, and he talks about baseline happiness. Was that a book you were? What was the name of that book?
I was just like Googling around about the hedonic treadmill, and then I kind of stumbled across this thing that was like linked to it about baseline happiness. But if there's a book about that, I'll hunt it down, because that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'll look for it. And if I can, I'll put in the show notes, because this office hours will show up on Mixing Light in the Insights library, and I'll make sure that gets put into the show notes, whatever that was, or at least the podcast episode that talked about it. That's cool. All right. I'll be next, and then Peter, you're last. So it's interesting. I'm gonna just, I had a couple things I could talk about. I might have talked about this on a previous office hours, where I picked up a hobby, which, again, for me, this was about getting out of the house. I spend so much time working from home. I don't work at a facility. What you're looking at is my office, and it's attached to the main house here. And so, my commute is all of about 30 seconds. And I found that I was starting to go a little bit crazy. Not the lack of human contact, the lack of human contact that had nothing to do with what I do for a living, right? And I just needed to get out of that. And, about a year ago, we went bowling after 30 years of never doing it on a lark. There was a bowling alley out here in Orlando, and we just went with some friends. We had a freaking blast. I discovered there was a local league called the Lousy Bowlers League. And what it is you go out, and it's 2 hours a week, and it is actually coached. So there's a coach, and, there's like 15 lanes of us, 2 people per lane. And the coach goes around and she teaches you like the skill of bowling. And I got to tell you that it's not so much, it's great. It's brilliant meeting other people who have nothing to do with what we do, all walks of life. Everyone's there for the same reason. So you already have like this common thing. We all want to learn how to bowl, and we all suck, right? That's like the baseline start. And then you layer on that a coach. And then we've been doing this, several of us have been through it like 4 times now. They're like 8-week classes, right? So we've been through it like 4 times. And I mean, scores are starting to just skyrocket now. And the teacher is amazing. She was Women's PGA Tour. When she retired in 1989 is when she retired. She was the winningest in the money female bowler when she retired. On ESPN, they ranked her having the 13th best female bowling season ever. And this woman knows her stuff, and it's been brilliant developing a skill in a very defined, focused way, and then watching the skill improve over time, because you put into the thing your email address, and it keeps track of your scores over time. And I can see the improvement, then the worsening, the flatlining, the improvement, and then the shoot up, and then the falling down again. She has you working on new stuff. So I got to tell you, it's really like with Zeb, it's really helped me just generally have a better attitude about life in going out and learning something physical that is a skill you can actually develop and kind of benchmark. And that's been brilliant for me. I've absolutely loved that. Peter, you're up.
All right. So my new thing is, for a while, I've been searching for kind of my like holy grail outboard Omniscope monitor. I've been running Omniscope off of a Mac Mini M1 to like my secondary monitor, but I'm losing a lot of my screen real estate that way. And I wanted to have that secondary monitor, and then get a specialized monitor for it. So I finally found it. And let me grab my camera set up here. Excuse me for a second. See if we can show it here.
Oh, is that what Joey is using?
No, Joey is using the Asus little ProArt one, which is awesome, but is kind of expensive. It's like $500, and it's a touch screen, but not functional for the Mac. You can't use the touchscreen side of it. So I've been looking for a monitor like that. It's about the same size. It's 14 inches. But I found this on AliExpress. And so I'll drop the link in the comments box. It's $200, power and signal over USB-C, which is awesome. So it's a one cable solution. It's super high res. It's 3840 by 1100. So, really high pixel density for a monitor that small, and it's awesome. It works great. So I've been super excited about that because I finally got, my scopes off of my secondary monitor over there. And now I've got that screen real estate back.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a fantastic solution. I look forward to seeing that link and checking it out.
Yeah, I'm just dropping it in here right now. That's an enormous link, but that's where it is. So,
all right, that's brilliant. Now, so we have for today's office hours, we have two questions, and they both come from the same person. And I'm pretty sure I saw Maria here. Maria, that was you, right? You can raise your hand if you want, and unmute yourself if you want.
Hello. Hi. Everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Maria.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having my questions here.
I have to apologize because a little behind the scenes, you and I have been going back and forth on one of these questions for a while, and I've never given you a good answer. And I figured, you know what, it was time, pull the Band-Aid, have this office hours, and deal with lovely Maria, who
thank you so
honestly,
much.
I've dropped the ball on you, so I'm happy to start this off by cleaning up that little mess. And what I'm going to do, Maria, is why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do? Because we don't do a lot of that on Mixing Light about who our members are and what they're trying to do. And just give us like the 1 minute of who you are and what you try to do.
So I'm basically, I'd say colorist or junior colorist maybe, in a company. I'm here in Athens, Greece. So actually I'm also an assistant, so I'll do all the work around conforming and deliverables. And I do also take some projects for color. So I'm through all the phases of the workflow and pipeline. And the question I sent you is about a short film that I'm going to do for my thesis to take my diploma in the University of Cinema we have here in Greece. And I want to work as a daily colorist in this particular short film. And then we'll do the SDR grade in a theatrical shoot that we have. And then we'll do the HDR Dolby Vision grade as well. So for me, I have to tell you that I'm a beginner in color management and also in working in log timeline color space. So yes, that's
okay. So thank you for that introduction. And what I'm going to do is I've taken your email and I've kind of cleaned it up a little bit, made it a little bit shorter, turned it into some slides. I pulled some screenshots so that everyone here can get on the same page as what our discussion's about. And I'll run through this, and then you can correct anything that I might have gotten wrong. And then we'll open it up to our contributors to see what they have to say. So let me go ahead, and I want to share my screen. Let's share the desktop and jump into this slideshow. Okay. So she needs to set up a color pipeline that will work from production to post-production. During production, Daly's colorist, build a show LUT that will be used for monitoring on set and for Daly's proxies creation, and also do the final grading in DI. The first grade will be the cinema grade, which is interesting. So your intention is that this is for cinema. That's your hero grade. That's what you're going to do first. After that, we will do an HDR grade in Dolby Vision. So you do the trims, and then you're going to do the final SDR. And we need to create a project inside of Resolve, which you're using 17.2. Are you still using 17.2?
Yes.
Okay. You've got a show LUT. It shouldn't clip any data through the pipeline. And then one of the ways you're thinking about doing this is working Resolve color management with DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate. I'd like to set color management in project level instead of node-based, so that's a good point to know. My confusion is about the project settings in the color management tab. I don't want to use the preset DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate, as I think I need to have more control on the settings under the preset. If I choose custom, I have options for timeline working luminance, input, and output DRTs. So what I did is I pulled some screenshots to get us all on the same page. So on the top here is Color Science, DaVinci YRGB Color Managed. Now, by default, automatic color management is turned on. And the HDR, if you pull down for HDR, you have two options, HDR and SDR, that's it. If you turn off automatic color management, you'll see that the HDR turns into HDR Rec 2020 Intermediate. And if you click on that pull down, you have a whole bunch more color processing modes, including custom. So what you're thinking is just selecting one of these HDR presets isn't enough. You want more color, more granular control. So you want to go into custom in order to have that control. When you do that, now you get all of this other options in here, right? So color processing mode is on custom. Now you've got your input DRT, your output DRT, as well as a bunch of these checkboxes and all this goodness. And then you also mentioned that in doing the research on this, you went to Dolby's website where they have a course, and the recommendations for setting up a project in Resolve color management is for no tone mapping to be enabled. So if you take a look here, by default, input tone mapping and output tone mapping is set to DaVinci. Now, there's some other options you have there. But in the screenshot you pulled from the course, you'll notice that there is no tone mapping. Output tone mapping is off. And you're wondering about that. You tried these different tone mapping settings and notice that and by the way, I have to point out the difference we see here between my screenshot and the one on the Dolby website. Dolby's looks like, I guess it's coming from Resolve 17. This is from Resolve 18, my particular screenshot. So you try different tone mapping settings and notice that if we follow Dolby's recommendations and set everything to none in project settings, the image we're getting as a starting point is more difficult to work with. You know, you have to feel like you have to bring the highlights all the way back in. Then the contrast and saturation changes in a way that feels unnatural compared to if you had enabled an output DRT set to luminance or DaVinci, or if you're working unmanaged using an RE to Rec 709 LUT, which in theory probably has this tone mapping built into the LUT. It's a bit difficult for me to understand if someone should or should not use tone mapping if there's also an HDR grade happening as well. Let me know your thoughts. So I am going to stop the share. Oh, and yeah,
can you sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, can you upgrade to 18? Because there's a lot of advancements in all of this that would make your life better, and it doesn't cost anything for an upgrade to 18. Is that possible, or is it limited by the system or the company you're working at, or something like that?
No, we will probably do it soon, I think.
Yeah,
it's something
definitely.
we have in mind, because there's also the Alexa 35 coming out. So
yeah. And also those Dolby settings I would not bother with at all. They're I don't know why those are the recommendations.
I agree.
They seem
Yep.
unusual. But yeah, I'm just kind of butting in. Pat, should I keep talking, or
keep talking? No. Give us your thoughts. This is exactly what I wanted. Yep.
Could you bring up the screens, because I can't show anything. It's really hard without being able to visually talk about it, because there's so many variables. But like what you're doing there in terms of the the custom settings are really good. The things that I would point out is that you would typically, you're going to change your timeline color space to the DaVinci wide gamut intermediate. Obviously, I'm just basing this on my normal workflow. Lots of workflows.
Patrick, I'm set up to show my DaVinci screen for this, so we can walk through the presets live. Let me do that.
Oh, cool.
And
I'll just tell you what I do,
yeah,
and then
just
someone
tell
else
me
can tell
what
them
you want to see.
Yeah, cool.
Let's see here.
Oh, this is exciting. I would show my screens, but I've got lots of stuff on that I'm not allowed to show anyone. But lots of exciting projects on the go.
Maria, you've got us all very excited over here with your question.
So yeah, go color managed and take off the automatic and custom. Boom. So timeline color space, I would do DaVinci wide gamut intermediate. Yeah, timeline working space is going to be 1,000 unless you're doing something higher than that. Output is going to, well, it would normally depend on your deliverable, but for the most part, that output color space is going to be, well, I just go in and do P3 D65 1000 nits from down ST2084.
Yeah. So this would be the HDR version, but you would switch this over to P3 D65 for that primary cinema deliverable that you were talking about doing first.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on that really quickly, and then I'll leave it to everybody else. But so this is the way that I would go, and I would sort of start this way. So output color space you won't need because we're not needing to limit it in that situation. But your there's an option they use inverse DRT for SDR to HDR conversion. I've been pleading with Blackmagic to turn that off. By default, it's on by default, and it's the worst thing, in my opinion, the worst thing in the world. I do lots of documentary, so lots of the content's SDR, and it just tries to pull it out to HDR, just like working in Aces does by default. And it's one of the reasons that I'm not fond of Aces, but that's getting fixed.
Hey Zeb, is that actually trying to take your 100 IRE and just kick it up all the way to 1,000?
Just take it. Yeah,
okay.
And it's not what you want, and it's not pleasant, and it's on by default, and it just really shouldn't be. And then obviously your graphic white level. Now, graphic white level is an interesting one. Now, most people kind of typically will work with that at something like 250 to 300. I've been saying it's worth going crazy on that. Put it up to like 600, 700, because you can bring it down, but you can't bring it up. So if you have it high, and then you can set your white level, like on the feature I've just finished, I've set my white level at like on the actual sort of color picker at like 50% or 60%. But if you set it to 300 and then somewhere along the production you realize you need to push it a little bit more for the caption, you get into a kind of a process of having to do that through grading the thing up, or because you can't actually move the white up. So that's something there. And then the HDR mastering, you can click that to 1,000. But so the reason why I say this, and the reason why I say go to 18, is because the way that we're doing almost every feature film that we do now, feature documentary, is that we do everything HDR first, and then we'll do a Dolby, because you can do theatrical trims now. So we'll use Dolby Vision to do a theatrical trim and the SDR trim, and they're handled within that metadata. And then so you've got one primary deliverable, and you make your two trims down from that to the other variables. And I'll stop talking now, unless someone has questions.
Okay, can I ask one question?
Yes.
So the timeline working luminance, is it something, when you start from SDR, is it something that you leave it on your peak 1,000 nits if that's what you're grading out for HDR, or is it something that should be changed if you're working in SDR and then working in HDR?
Someone might know better than me, but I think that is just your cap for where it's going to limit your luminance. So if you're working to 1,000 nits, that's where that sits. Am I right there?
I mean, I've always I always work with it really high, no matter what, and I never change it, and it never looks any different. And I've never had any trouble with that.
Yeah, there's an interaction really there between that and your mastering display, because the way that you're going to grade for your mastering display probably isn't going to go past the peak luminance of what that display is capable of. Otherwise it would look like it's clipping to you. So generally, you either set it really high like Kaylee does and just work to that peak luminance on your mastering display, and then that travels down the chain, or you can limit it to the luminance of your mastering display, where in this case it would be 1,000 nits if you were working on 1,000 nit monitor.
Thing is
Howard,
that you
did you-
very rarely get that high. Like
Yeah.
even when you're grading HDR, you're not going to get anywhere near it and have a pleasant image. So I just wouldn't worry about it, to be honest.
Yeah, that was the thing I think, all of us learned early on was, just because we've got all of that headroom, you don't want to turn it to 11 on HDR. It's like the stuff that sits between, for me, like the 400 to 600 nits for a cinematic grade, gives enough of the HDR feeling without having to turn it, all the way up.
Howard, you had your hand up for a moment. Did you want to add anything to this particular conversation?
Yes. So as far as I know, which most of it comes from Colin Kelly, is the reason to have it up high is because if you have it any lower, then at the beginning of your pipeline, the highlights will be rolled off. But if you have it at custom and 10,000, then the highlights will go as high as they go, and they will only be rolled off either by the changes you make or at the end of the pipeline with your ODT.
Yeah, that's great.
Right.
Now, this graphics white level thing mostly has to do with DaVinci Resolve's internal graphics generation, right?
It is, and it doesn't affect a lot of things. So like Fusion doesn't get impacted by it. There's a number of different things, but it will affect your things to be aware of, your sort of burn-in. So if you've got doing a burnt-in timecode version or something like that, you need to be cautious to kind of ramp your opacity down on the text, your subtitles and things like that. So that is a case of kind of still you're setting those, and you'll kind of manually do that. But then you have the ability, if you've kind of got darker shots or lighter shots, you can then push that white level, especially wherever you want it to go, regardless of what it's sitting on. So we normally find that the white level, depending on what it is, we kind of usually want it sitting around wherever our peaks are within the image, depending on what it's actually on top of, because there's obviously a lot of things downstream that get hit by that as well. So it's how the different screens and the different like backlight modulation works, will work differently depending on what the white is sat on. Anyway.
Now, one question that Maria had been asking was about the setting the input and output DRTs to none versus DaVinci or Luminance. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, I just think the DaVinci one's very nice. I think they do a really good job. Everything I've looked at has been good going through them since Blackmagic upgraded RCM. It's been really good. With none, I mean, it would be a bit like Blackmagic, like RCM used to work, where it just kind of would just stretched everything out to full, and you'd have to grade it down to start working, right? Puts you in a much better working place.
I agree wholeheartedly. Like, I just think the DaVinci ones look really good. In the last Dolby Vision series I used those without any trouble. I don't recall seeing them set to none doing the Dolby Vision training. And I wonder if that's changed or if I just wasn't paying attention to that part of the course. Does anyone else remember or know if there's like a reason that it was set that way in the Dolby Vision training? Because it could be a hangover from an older color management system, perhaps.
Yeah,
I mean, if
so
it was
the
set
settings
to
in there
none,
all seemed odd.
You have to do it manually because you have to do something. It needs some kind of reference transform, especially on the on the outgoing side. So you would essentially just have to build that yourself if you set it to none.
There's the Dolby videos that Robbie and
Joey
did.
I produced that.
We did. They're great. And yeah, I don't recall that being one of those settings within.
I'm
that
trying to
either.
remember what version of Resolve we recorded that series in, and
It's probably 17.
yeah, it's probably 17, and so I'm pretty sure they've always set run with something on their input and output.
The one thing they did that I don't bother with is separating out the color space and gamma. I've just not really seen a need for it in most scenarios. So the only different, like pretty much every spec we deliver to is based on this, and the only variation on that is HBO Max. They want a Rec 2020 file, but to make it slightly more complicated, they don't want the P3 limiting metadata in anything. They just want it to be a Rec 2020 file. So that makes it a little bit more difficult because you then can't do your limiting in the color management because that metadata comes through into the IMF. So, but yeah, that's
and
the settings we use.
And in the comments, Kaur wrote that DaVinci Resolve certified trainers had a masterclass from Dolby. They just did a big thing out in Europe, and both DRTs were set to DaVinci. So that's under Resolve 18. That's the new normal.
Right.
Anyone from the audience have anything else they might want to add to this conversation, or did we confuse you on something you'd like to get clarification on? Maria, how are you feeling about this?
Just one more question about that. So I don't know if it can be that simplified. If I do the SDR grade and I set my settings into DaVinci, into DRT and output, then everything that I have to do in order to change from Rec 709 for the dailies to P3 for the cinema grade, and then for P3 HDR, is just changing the output color space. And then everything else will be the same. And I won't have an issue of losing data or whatever.
I mean, I wanted to ask about the order that you're doing the grades in and see whether or not it would be possible for you to bump up the HDR grade to your first grade, even if it's not your main deliverable. Because I've always found, and I know it's like it's best practice according to Dolby to do the HDR grade first, but beyond that, it actually makes your life a bit easier because you can see everything that you're doing. You're on a display that's showing you that range of color and that range of luminance, and you're not going to accidentally work some tones into your highlights that you'll not see in your especially cinema grade, and then jump over into the most extreme other end of the spectrum into HDR and reveal a bunch of stuff that you don't want to see and then have to control it. Going the other way, I think, is going to be a bit of a time saver for you and also save you a few headaches, depending on whether or not the client and the facility are okay with that.
Yes. At this point, it's not exactly a client or a facility because, as I said earlier, it's my thesis, my diploma.
I mean, theatrical grade first is something that people want, and there is a benefit in knowing how to handle that. My thought is if you can do the HDR first, I would recommend it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead, Maria.
No, I just wanted to say that I don't know if it's quite common that people might want to do the theatrical grade is the more important for them, and then they'll do the HDR.
And that is a
just
trick.
more work, though, right?
That is something to navigate because people, they come in and they go, all right, I want to be in the theater and that's what I'm paying for. And that's, our main delivery because, we really think that we're going to, do this huge festival run, or we're going to have that, 1,000 screens or whatever it is. But in terms of color management, you're working in the smallest bucket first, really.
Also, the Dolby trims have only come in recently as well for theatrical, which makes it a whole that's a game changer in terms of the ease and speed of doing that and the accuracy of going from one version to all of the others. Whereas in the past you didn't have that functionality, and therefore doing the two separate, fine. It's but now it's kind of a game changer.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, I love that advice, Kaylee. It's always seemed to me that, and it was interesting because Tashi brought it up in Peter's article on Avatar, the second Avatar film, where he talked about how working in as wide, a picture as you can, the highest contrast ratio with the widest gamut, allowed him to see things he otherwise would not have seen if they had just gone with the version that got the initial widest distribution. So typically, whatever gets you the widest distribution, that's what you're going to master. That's your mastering solution, right? But in his case, he started with essentially the biggest image he could, the most contrast, the most color, and it allowed him to see things that he otherwise wouldn't have caught in some of these down conversions. And so he really enjoyed that process, starting from that bigger bucket and then working your way down to the smaller buckets.
Yeah, and I just think it's easier, like, because when I was grading Elvis, myself and the other colorist, we're sitting in a theater and we're doing a theater grade. At the same time, we had an OLED on the desk, and there were things that I could see on the OLED that I couldn't see on the projector, even though it was a Christie laser projector and like calibrated, and you couldn't really do much better than that. Just the nature of light, and especially in the shadows and the blacks, there's no saturation in the shadows. So you're not seeing color in there. And if you have a color cast in your shadows, if you're not paying huge attention to your scopes, you can end up with some colors in your shadows that you might not intend. When you're on an OLED or a backlit display of any kind, you're going to see into those blacks and you're going to see a lot more. So just in terms of precision, I think like that was actually massive for us to have that ability to check between them and pick up things that we might have then found during a trim and gone, oh.
And if I could ask one more question, and this is unrelated to what Maria had asked, but I think we're in the right discussion here for it. And this recently came in off our office hours submission line. It came in yesterday or the day before, talking about the input color space set to Rec 709 scene. There was a question in there about why scene, because what the person had seen all the time is in training up until recently, everyone was, selecting their gamma, Rec 709 2.4 or 2.2. Why are they were asking, why am I noticing that everyone seems to be picking Rec 709 scene these days? Anyone have a comment on that?
I mean, the way that I understand it is that Rec 709 scene refers to the Rec 709 that comes out of a camera, basically. That's the scene referred version of Rec 709 as captured by a device. Whereas the other versions, if you're specifying a gamma, it's a display referred destination color space.
That's my understanding too.
And almost everything's going to have its color management set, in the process of bringing it in if it's something different. So this really only applies to files that don't have any kind of actual metadata information. It's just what the default is if they don't have a default, So, and then you would still override it if you want to in most situations. And either way, at this point, you're grading it from there to wherever you're going.
Yeah, I actually picked up an interesting piece of information on another forum talking about this kind of, there's like this magic color space conversion LUT or input transform inside ACES that's labeled as sRGB texture, but basically it's a transform for ACES, kind of addressing what you were talking about, Zeb, how ACES just wants to like completely transform Rec 709 and expand it out. This prevents it from doing that and kind of puts it in a much more logical space. And I've been using that in my ACES projects for dealing with Rec 709 material, and the results have been much nicer. So, there are these utility transforms out there to help work with 709 stuff.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is just a sophistication in the tool set. And then everyone's adapting to the new sophistication of the tools. We're getting more options. The color science is getting better. The math behind it's getting better. And we're given these options that you don't have to expose if you don't want to. You can go with run with those resolved presets, and for 90% of its user base, perfectly fine. You know, you can do an HDR grade using an HDR preset and get really, really good results without going into all of this granular custom management stuff.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, you know, when I'm grading HDR, instead of using the custom, I really do find that the HDR DaVinci Wide Gamut Intermediate preset does, you know, what I want it to. I get the results that I want without having to set all of those granular things. You know, it's kind of been thought out that way. So all I have to do is just, you know, pick my,
unless you're working with that
output.
SDR material that Zeb was talking about and has that inverse transform put onto that SDR material.
Right.
And then
yeah, the issue there is, for us, a lot of this data actually follows through into the metadata of the deliverables as well. Yeah. And so if we've not checked that and confirmed it and made sure it's accurate, it can turn into an issue for the delivery team down the road. It's kind of goes out of hand pretty quickly. Yep. If it's not set right at the start, obviously that then turns into a much bigger issue once you've finished your grade.
Yeah. It's all in the XML, isn't it? It's all in that.
Yeah.
So Maria had a second question. We have about a little over 15 minutes left. Peter, if you could stop your screen share for a moment, and then I'll get back to mine.
So did we cover the part about working?
There's the onset stuff and show lot stuff, isn't there? Yeah. I don't do a lot of that. I can give opinions, but if someone else knows more, then do that.
I mean, my thought on that would be, if you create a show lot that's within color management, so it's more of an LMT, you know, that doesn't have the display transform baked in, just something that changes the primaries and the color information in a creative way and leave the transforms to the color management, you'll be fine. Very unlikely to clip. I don't even think you should worry about that, especially if you're working color managed. Like if you were working in linear or something, yeah, you might get some clipping, you might get some negative values, but I think you'll be fine. The adjustments that you'll make will be quite small.
It starts being a problem when you're getting a LUT supplied by a DOP who has like a show LUT that they like to work with, and you know, say that's a log C to Rec 709 LUT, and that's their look. That's more of a problem, and it, you know, sometimes you have to figure out a way to reverse engineer that into a you know, a LMT or some other kind of transform that works inside of the color managed environment that you're working in, and that can be a challenge.
That actually sets up our second question of the day, also from Maria. So that was an excellent transition. And what we're going to do is jump back into my browser here and go into question number 2. She's graded as an episode from a series in ASUS node-based workflow, unmanaged with the project timeline being ASUS. So unmanaged project timeline ASUS. We used ARILOG C to Rec 709, LUT the DOP wanted us to use, and then an ASUS transform to move from Rec 709 to ASUS CCT, all in the clip level, so using it in a node-based structure. The timeline level, we had another ASUS transform to move from ASUS CCT to Rec 709 for the display transform. Now we need to open the project in the Cinema Suite to make adjustments and then output to DCP. We outputted a test DCP directly from the project by changing the ODT to DCDM, but it's not working. The colors appear wrong. You know what's the best way to proceed, both for opening the project to our Cinema Suite, where the output has to be either DCI XYZ or P3 D65 2.6. These are 2 different presets that the projector has been calibrated for, or for outputting to DCP. And I actually did pull some screenshots on just DCP settings, what your various DCP settings are, if we need to come up to that. And also the color space transform, you have a possibility there that you can use. So I'm going to send this off to our contributors to see what they have to say.
It's pretty complicated.
It is, right? There's a lot to like pull down there, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of the hoops you're jumping through. I wonder if rendering out and doing like one color transform might be simpler.
That was actually my thought, because it's very easy to go from Rec 709 to a projector, just doing a DCP export, letting the DCP software do that XYZ transform, export out an EDL, slice the whole thing up, and now you're just basically doing a trim pass on a pre-baked clip. That was one of my thoughts. I can also understand why you don't want to do that if you want to do a more sophisticated color management, and there are reasons not to do it that way. And I guess the first thing that jumped to my mind was putting that LUT. So what you have is a DOP who gave you a LUT that has a transform, a display transform. And so now, and then you're doing your color grading post that. So you're essentially you've now shrunk everything down into your display space, and you're working after that. And my question is, why not put that at the end of the chain, at least, as your kind of look, and then work before the look? I wonder if anyone else has any thoughts.
Yeah, with a display transform baked into that LUT that you're getting from the DP, that's kind of like a replacement for aces, right? It's like, if you're going to work with that show LUT, it doesn't make as much sense to work in aces, because you'll never have a compliant aces pipeline with that LUT baked inside of it. So you either have to somehow extract the look and separate the look from the display transform in that LUT, and then implement that as a LMT inside an aces pipeline, a look modification transform, or you just work outside of aces and put together your own color management in a node-based way, and then stick that show LUT at the end, or use it as a timeline LUT or something like that, and then just bag aces altogether if there's not a reason to be using aces.
I wonder though, is this already graded? Is this already done and dusted? Like, can you change the workflow at this point, or are you locked in?
We are locked in because we're on the third episode already. There wasn't a need to do a theatrical grade. So what we did was export the Rec 709 master file, and then exported the DCP from that. So we have the correct image. But
I think personally that's the best way to go. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but especially because you've already limited the color space so early in the chain, I don't think you're losing anything. I think if it was all like completely open aces or DaVinci wide gamut intermediate, it would be a different conversation, and you might be throwing away some useful information, but I think it's already gone. So you can't get back what you don't have. But I'm sorry to interrupt. I realized you were still talking.
I wonder if the issue with it not looking correct at the end might have to do with the way that aces is transforming that 709 that's coming out of that LUT, like Zeb was talking about, how aces wants to expand that 709 signal into aces space. It does so in a way that it doesn't make sense. That's not the way that you would normally want a 709 image to look. And so when you take off the DRT or the ODT at the end in order to render your DCDM version, it's taking off that aces transform, and now you've got this like weirdly transformed Rec 709 data. What do you think, Zeb? Am I?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also a bit of a LUT hater, so I'm probably going to make enemies, or maybe not. Maybe I'm amongst friends, but I hate them with passion. They are obviously a crude sort of way to achieve a result, which was just the only route to get that result in the past, and it's not the only route anymore. So it's like supporting old technology just because you used to. Yeah, I would, in any situation like that, I would sort of, obviously it's too late to do this as mentioned, but I would start by looking at it. If it's something that the DP wanted, I would use that as a reference to rebuild my own thing that matched that, but could take it further than what a LUT could take it, and not clip and be destructive and all of those sorts of things. So, but yeah, I think it's probably just too much transforming. I would just take a submaster basically, and then make my deliverable from that. Let's make it a DCP. So yeah, a temporary or a mezzanine file, whatever you want to call it, and use that to make my DCP and deal with that conversion at the end.
I would also say if you could look at moving that LUT to the end of your chain, you might just try, even though you're on episode 3, for the next episode, you might try that as a test. Like take 30 minutes, put it at the end of the chain and see what happens. You may find that you're not appreciably changing the end look of your show, but it's easier to get the detail you need out of it. So you're going to have there might be some little additional richness to it that doesn't look appreciably different, but may give you some more latitude in the color grading process and doesn't automatically clip elements out and gives you the ability to pull things in. So you might want to take a look at that, and or use some of these LUT, third-party LUT tools where you can actually say, all right, I know what this is supposed to do. It's got this RE to Rec 709 transform. Back that out and just give me the RGB changes and see what happens if you do that. That might be worth experimenting on, even if you're in the middle of the project. If you can make it just the details a little bit better, give your colorists more opportunity to save images that they might otherwise be struggling with, it might be worth that little bit of effort.
It's also just a log C to Rec 709 LUT, right? So it's not immensely complicated anyway. So you could just replace that with a color management or an ACES transform and put display transform or a curve.
A curve.
Does it have a special look built into it, Maria? Is that like a custom look that has been built?
I think so. Well, I'm not sure how it was created because, as I said, the DP had it, I think, from another colorist, or he made it himself. I'm not sure. It's mostly the contrast, and it's not something that it's way too different from the classical log C to Rec 709. Maybe with the blues, the shadows. But nothing really.
One thing that you might try is, I think it was Kevin Shaw who did a curves class through another forum, and he had this technique where he would apply a LUT to a grayscale. Like if you create a ramp and then compound clip that, you could apply that LUT to that grayscale, and then you could apply a Rec 709 LUT to that grayscale, and then you can see really what it's doing. And you can actually use that technique to duplicate the look down to a pretty granular level, and create it out of curves. And if you created it out of curves, then you're not losing anything, but you're still getting the same effect.
Yeah, I think Josh Peacock actually, I think 8 years ago, he did something on Mixing Light in Avid, showing you how to use curves to deconstruct a look. And you essentially get, you undo kind of the gamma transform and leave, you get that RGB separation throughout the grayscale.
I think it's great because, sometimes you want to use the look that the DP sent you, but also you want to do it in a nice way. And they can be really forceful. I find when someone comes in with a look that they've created, and, a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing. I get guys coming in with, I've created a look and here's a bunch of power grades and that's going to save you heaps of time. And it's like, oh, dude, I don't work the same way that you do. And I'm not used to working in a YRGB project, please do not force that on me. So being able to transpose that is really handy, but you just need a bit of time. And maybe in your position, you've actually got that time. When someone just pulls it in with them for a commercial grade, you're kind of in trouble. But, it sounds like your position in the facility, you might be able to sit down and spend a couple of hours just deconstructing it and creating a curved version of it.
All right, so we only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. quick notes. There was a question here, lightning round about NAB. I will say right off the bat that for Mixing Light members, take a look at the event calendar early next week. If you're going to be at NAB and you are an active Mixing Light member, the Monday of NAB, I will be hosting a monitor crawl. So I'm going to put together a list of all the manufacturers. I'll announce a point where we can all gather and a time that Monday afternoon, probably 1:30. And from there, we'll visit all the major display manufacturers, see what they've got on. There's usually some specialty projector vid display walls, some crazy funky future tech that's coming out of Japan or something. We'll try to drop that into there just to have some fun. Some holographic displays are usually pretty fun in the future section of NAB. And I guess I can say it. I'm going to see if there's something at Dolby as well, if the Dolby guys want to host us and maybe talk about what they've done the past year or 2 years. It's been a while since NAB. Talk about some of the latest stuff that they've been doing. If I can make that happen, be on the lookout. If you want to join us, be on the lookout for an email that's only going out to active Mixing Light members, and fill out the form so I get your name, your contact information, and I get a head count to decide how crazy this is going to be. I'm not sure how many people on this call are going to be at NAB. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. 2 of us. All right. So, yeah. So, I'm looking forward to that. Anyone have anything big that they're looking for at NAB that maybe they've heard about? I mean, the question asks about, will there be a new version of the advanced panel or, anything coming from Blackmagic. If you hear about it before it's announced on their website, is either pure speculation or someone broke some NDA, and you have to question that as well. So if anyone on this call actually knows the answer to those questions, they can't tell you. They can't even tell you that they can't tell you. So I'm not going to pose that question to any of our panelists here, but what about any, like a successor to the Sony X300? I mean, as far as I know, so there is nothing coming from Sony, so you're gonna have to look elsewhere. Am I correct on that? As far as
you just have to go and hassle Bram and see if their suppliers are managing to get the XM312s out.
Yeah.
That's what everyone's waiting for.
I mean, there has been some big news recently out of the display space with JOLED filing for bankruptcy. That's throwing everybody's future plans for HDR OLED panels up in the air. So, I know that affects Flanders. I know that affects Sony, Asus as well. So I think that the professional monitor space from the OLED standpoint is going to be in flux for a bit as that shakes out, because there are some other companies that are acquiring the IP, but not the manufacturing facilities. So all of us that were hoping for a really nice, high brightness OLED panel using the JOLED technology are probably going to have to wait for a little longer.
All righty. So we're going to have to wrap that up. Our time is up. Our 60 minutes is up. I want to thank Maria for submitting her questions and showing up and talking with us about some of the challenges that you're facing, Maria. Thank you very much. And I want to thank all of our members who showed up here on Zoom, and the people who are watching on the stream. Thank you very much. This stream will stay live on YouTube probably for about a week. Once it puts into the Mixing Light library, it will come down off of YouTube. And then I want to thank Peter and Zeb and Kaylee and for taking the time out of their busy schedules to help educate everyone else. So Patrick Inhofer, for everyone on this call, we'll see you next time.